You're listening to Edge of Faith, a multimedia magazine where we discuss art and culture through a Christian lens. So Makoto, thank you so much for coming on the show and taking time to talk to us about your new book, Silence and Beauty.
Thanks for inviting me.
Sure. So, maybe before we get started on your new book, maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about the Fujimura Foundation and what it is about.
Right. So I have founded several organizations all under one nonprofit, which is International Arts Movement. And that's been going on for 25 years. I began the Fujimura Institute as part of that, and that was an effort to bring what we call culture care conversation into the academia. And we had several projects under that, collaborative projects. And then quite recently, I joined Fuller Seminary as the director of Brehm Center. And the idea was to combine what I am doing as an artist and the leadership that brings through International Arts Movement and Fujimura Institute to partner with Brehm Center. So we'll be hosting Culture Care Summit, February 8th through 12th in Pasadena. So we do multiple projects. Upcoming Fujimura Institute project is on silence and beauty. We are going to be in Nagasaki, where Shusaku Endo walked about to write silence, and there is a museum dedicated to him. And I am doing an exhibit, and we're doing a collaborative performance as well as a symposium there. So there are ways of speaking into culture this way, and Brehm Center as a center of theology, worship, and culture is dedicated to such an integration as well.
Wow, that sounds like some pretty exciting and interesting activities.
Right.
Thank you for doing such things to bring awareness. So now to the book. Maybe for those that aren't as familiar with Endo's novel Silence, and obviously haven't seen the movie since it's not out yet.
Right.
Perhaps you could tell the audience at a high-level overview of the subject matter it represents.
Sure. Shusaku Endo is a Japanese novelist of 20th century, died in 1995, I believe. But his first novel was a novel called Silence. And it is surprisingly, it became a bestseller despite the fact that it talks about a very troublesome past of Japanese culture, which is began in really 15th century, but 16th century, but novel takes place in 17th century Japan of two young Portuguese missionaries coming into Japan, which was forbidden it was closed to Christianity, and Christians were being persecuted by the dictatorial forces that consolidated Japan at the time. And so these young priests, Father Rodriguez and Father Gape, fictional names, but they are based on true historical figures. Endo tells of the story of their capture and their torture. It is not an easy book to read, especially if you're a Christian, since it deals with persecution. But at the same time, Endo is a highly descriptive, beautiful writer who told this universal story, really, of post-war conditions he describes these psychological traits of those who are traumatized by wars and what is expanding ground zeros of the world. And his novel Silence became a national bestseller in Japan, and then when it was translated into English, it became a global bestseller. And to the extent that Martin Scorsese found himself fascinated by this story to create what he has called his life work movie, which is upcoming either later this year or the next year.
Yeah, right. That I look forward to watching the movie as well.
Yeah.
I think the last I saw it was like probably November or something like that.
Yeah, we hope so. We're not quite sure, but yeah, Father Rodriguez is played by Andrew Garfield, Father Agape by Adam Driver, and Father Ferreira, who these younger priests sought to find in Japan, is played by Liam Neeson. So this is quite a cast.
Wow. So back on to the next question. You were somewhat inspired by Indo. Can you elaborate on how and why?
Right, and my encounter with Endo came very early. I read Endo in college, but I was not a Christian, and so I had a little bit of a different take on it. And when I went to Japan, I found myself drawn to Christ through my wife, and as I was just baptized in Christian faith, I walked into a national museum near my studio, and along with 17th century masterpieces of Limpa screens, there are very beautiful decorative screens. It was this little dark room to the side, and I went in and saw these what looked like plates lined up in a display case, all 19 of them, and found out that this was called fumie, or stepping blocks of 17th century. The magistrates created bronze cast plates with picture of Jesus or Virgin Mary and the child on it, and they would line up everybody by the beach and ask every citizen to step on these plates. And Japanese, being so highly visual and honest, you could actually tell who would be holding faith to Jesus, and they would be arrested and sometimes tortured. This went on for 250 years. So what I remember about looking at these plates in person was that they were so smooth, worn smooth, that you could not tell what the image was about anymore. And in the comments that accompany the exhibit, they mentioned Endo's book, Silence, and I recalled this book and went back home and read Silence in both Japanese and in English. And even though I was baptized in the church, I call this my true baptism. It was as if God was revealing to me what I was being baptized into, this history of persecution and trauma that still, to this day, I believe, has had tremendous impact into Japanese culture.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, when you talk about them being truthful, you mean, they would notice even if they momentarily hesitated, then they would get arrested.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
That's just so sad.
Mm-hmm.
So, Endo has a different take on, because he's, identifying with the culture, but some found Endo's book to be offensive due to the way he handled apostasy. How did you initially receive that message, and did it change with you over time?
Well, I mean, this is a book that offends everyone, right? It offends the Japanese.
All right.
It offends the Japanese for reminding them of the past, true past, that Japanese, nationalism and isolationist tendencies have caused a lot of wars and aggression. And we have to remember he's writing this in 1950s, released in 1965, so we are fresh out of wars, and Japanese is still traumatized by Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so it's not very comfortable reading about your country's past aggressions, and yet Endo found a connection there. And if you're a Catholic, that you would think he is, why is he talking about priests who apostatized? Why not the heroes of the faith? And that is true. When you read silence, you end up in the corners of those who failed in their faith. And yet, as I write in Silence and Beauty book, I believe Endo has written a masterpiece of literature of grace that endures beyond these objections. And what Endo does is to set up the reader in such a way that we end up judging people, and that then he turns that as a mirror to us. And we realize that, no matter how heroic we may be, we would, in fact, we have stepped on our own fumiers, if not the face of Christ, but but perhaps faces of those who we love, things that we find beautiful or we cherish, in accommodating the culture or accommodating to trauma or pressures that are all about us. So, Endo skillfully describes that psychology, and that is why the Japanese, in general, Nagasaki diocese wanted to, well, I think they did ban the book, but nevertheless, in fact, Endo seemed to have anticipated this, and in the second edition, he writes a postscript saying that these reactions were rather to him anticipated, but what he was most gratified was that some writers outside the church have commented that he is more Protestant than Catholic because of the grace orientation that he projects into the story. I always tell people, if you are going to read this book, Silence, read it to the very end meaning the appendix. Do not miss the appendix. And in the Japanese original version, there is no word appendix. There's just a space. And the story ends, and then there is this telling of what happened to Father Rodriguez, Okada Sanemon, Japanese character now, who lives until I believe he lives for 30 some years, and this diary of the person keeping historical records, which is a historical document, only slightly modified by Endo, tells of the rest of the story. And many people don't even bother to read that, and they misunderstand the story altogether. In my experience. So read to the appendix, and also pay attention to what Father Rodriguez says at the end of the book, which is very telling as well.
Very interesting and good instruction. I'll make sure all the audience does so. So back to your book. Could you
Yes.
explain in more detail what you mean by beauty in your title,
Yes.
Silence and Beauty?
Sure. Sure. And it is a definition through Japanese understanding of beauty. So that includes idea of sacrifice and idea that has been refined over many, many years. I think it's a key to unlock Japanese culture. And the reason why I contrasted silence and beauty is because those are two words that are very descriptive and very important to the Japanese, and both have deeply layered meanings that eludes actually definition. They are both relational words, and we in the West we tend to want to define words and reduce them into categories, but these words tend to be alive in Japanese culture, deeply hidden, and to me they are connected to the gospel of Jesus as they portray suffering servant who, in Isaiah is spoken of as this figure that is to appear that would give us crown of beauty instead of ashes, and that is precisely what I believe Endo captured in the book Silence and many other books that he's written.
Yeah, that's wonderful. In your book, you talk a little bit about your art studies, and I've seen your work, and it's fascinating. Could you tell us a little bit about your artwork and its juxtaposition?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I was born in Boston and went to Sweden, went to Japan for grade school, and came back for middle school and high school and college, and then I went back for 6.5 years to study this ancient technique of painting called Nihonga. And Nihonga was coined in Meiji era, which is after the isolation era of Japan, but brought in modernism to Japan. And it's a category designating Japanese style paintings. But it really is a process. I call it slow art because just like slow food, you make your own paint, and every layer takes at least half a day to dry, and it's very meditative and contemplative. So to me, it suits my temperament. And yet I am painting very large-scale works that is shown in contemporary art galleries. So my works elude categorization as well. But ultimately, I realized writing this book that I too have been not only influenced, but been pursuing silence and beauty throughout my life. And as a Christian, these values have become even more important, especially recently. So I've continued to exhibit these works. I had a show last May in New York, and I will have another show in May of next year. I currently have a show up in Taipei, and I will have a show in Japan as well. So these paintings are being painted as I wrote the book and as I talk about the book.
I just want to point out for the audience too, just as you did with the appendix earlier, is not only does your art have a juxtaposition of the ancient method with modern style, it's kind of a juxtaposition to modern culture, because we Twitter and do things really fast, and your art is what's truly enjoyed is if you stare at it for 10 or 15 minutes to actually see the layers, right?
Yeah, you may not see it right away because some of the works are very monochromatic, and people think, oh, that's just a red square, But as you know, there are layers and layers of pigments on top, and you can actually, your eye can see the layers. It's just our brain says no,
Right.
So we need to kind of stop and behold the surface for a while before you can even see it.
Yeah, beautiful. Could you speak, I guess, a little bit as a theologian now as to why you find art to be necessary in Christianity?
Right. Well, the word necessary is
Maybe
a
strong.
tricky word. Well, no, it's just very utilitarian, and we tend to judge the value of something by its usefulness today. When I find God to be extraordinarily gratuitous and extravagant, the so-called extra, reality of God's dimension, that it cannot be explained just by usefulness or atheistic, pragmatic use. So I tend to think of art as beauty, as a way to open the door to that God's reality, which again eludes our categories. And in some ways, you find the most enduring things in what is useless, and at least in short term, but long term, we find these things that we cannot define, we cannot certainly commoditize and market, to be the most enduring things, and art belongs in that category. And true artists are ones that are stalking the borders of culture, and they are sensing, they have their antennae picking up signals of the universe, that continues to speak in mystery and to me, gratuitous beauty of God, extravagant beauty of God, and I believe that is at the heart of the gospel as well. God doesn't need us,
Right.
but God loves us. God created us not so that we can be useful, but so that we can be enjoyed by God. And we have, I think, especially in 20th century, made this into more of an industrial model, of how we approach theology. And so that reduces God's message to us. And artists are the ones that, to me, are keeping some of that alive. And so I find works by Endo or Flannery O'Connor or any enduring works tend to have those characteristics.
Right, absolutely. Ed, I guess the fact that we come from a creator, that's where we enjoy creativity, whether we're the artist or the enjoyer thereof. Yeah.
That's right. We're all called to create and to be makers, and that's part of the imprint that we have from the Creator God.
And that is truly amazing.
Yes.
So I believe you mentioned a couple in Silence and Beauty, but who are some of your personal inspirations or favorite artists?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I have mentioned in the book William Blake, who was very instrumental English poet and engraver, that spoke so much about this mystery of God, and I read him in college, and later on that became a seed, I believe, for me to come to know Christ. And I do talk about many Japanese artists. I mentioned Hasegawa Tohaku Hasegawa, who was a master painter of 17th century, as well as his friend Senno Rikyu, who was a tea master who, in war times of Japan, created shalom. And I trace his steps as part of my tracing of Japanese beauty and how that relates to silence. There are many contemporary New York artists, such as Mark Rothko and so many others have influenced me. Agnes Martin is another one that I love. So there are many contemporary artists as well.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're coming up towards the end of the interview. I want to thank you, and let me mention the book again, Silence and Beauty, Makoto Fujimura. And you can get it at any quality bookstore or online, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, University Press. And I'm delighted to partner with them, not only for this book, but to release my former book called Culture Care, and that's coming up next February. And there'll be a Culture Care imprint through University Press as well. So I'll be editing and helping to flesh out this idea. Silence and beauty is part of that, I think. So I look forward to engaging with people that way.
Well, we'll have to have you back on the show so we can discuss it.
That'll be great.
Perfect. All right, thank you.